We are fast approaching the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and I am thrilled to be talking to Peter Bergen. I worked with Peter Bergen at CNN. He's a lovely human, and he is also one of the few Western journalists to meet Osama bin Laden. He produced the first TV interview with bin Laden in 1997 when bin Laden declared his intention to start a campaign against the West. Peter is a journalist, a documentary producer, a professor, and now a best-selling author, most recently of this book, which I have to say I picked up and really had a hard time putting down to go back to doing my work, The Rise and Fall of Osama bin Laden. Peter, congrats. This is really well done.
Well, Jessica, thank you. And nice to be reunited virtually with you.
It's so nice to see you. I have been, of course, following all your work and your commentary throughout the last years and the last few weeks especially. I want to get to the current situation. But first, let's talk a little bit about your book, The Rise and Fall of bin Laden. We all know bin Laden as this mass murderer, this mastermind behind the al-Qaeda campaign against the West. But you paint this portrait of him as also a regular man. I was intrigued to read that he was taking Viagra to please his many wives. He used hair dye to keep his beard dark.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important that we have an understanding of him as just a man?
Well, humans make history. In fact, I think I quote somebody, gods don't make war, beasts don't make war, it's humans who make war. And Hitler was nice to his girlfriend and he was nice to his dog. That doesn't mean that he wasn't also a mass murderer. So my attempt to kind of explain bin Laden in 360 degrees, I'm not trying to humanize him. I'm just saying he was a human being, and he had this big impact on history. And he's one of the few people I think we can say to change the course of history. You're not as significant as Napoleon or Stalin or Hitler, but if you look at American foreign policy in the last 2 decades, basically bin Laden set this all in motion. He didn't think it was going to turn out this way, but without bin Laden, you wouldn't have had 9/11. It was really his idea, his strategy. He pushed 9/11 forward, even though people inside Al-Qaeda, some people said this is actually a bad idea because it could backfire. It might be dangerous for the Taliban. It might even be against Islam. These were some of the internal objections. But in terms of Jessica, what you picked up on, I do get into his family life, and he had a large family. He had 5 wives, one of whom divorced him. She was fed up essentially she didn't want to live like a medieval peasant in Sudan. When she married this guy, he had a lot of money and was living in Saudi Arabia, and suddenly she's living in Sudan. So she divorced him. But his, one of the surprises in the book is the extent to which he relied on his 2 oldest wives to do his, help him write his speeches, help him think out his strategy. 2 of his wives, the 2 oldest ones, had PhDs. One was 62 when he was killed. He was 54. Another one was 54. They both claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad, probably accurately. For bin Laden, that would be very important because he kind of modeled himself in his own mind on the Prophet Muhammad. And so, I try and get a little bit inside. The Trump administration released all these documents that were found in the compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where bin Laden was killed. And the most the key document was a 228-page family diary, which kind of gives some insights into how bin Laden thought about his family, his wives, how they were helping him. The Arab Spring happened, and as you recall, Jessica, it was a big deal, and suddenly the governments in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt and Yemen are all falling, and bin Laden was very cognizant of the fact that he was playing no role, his ideas were playing no role. So every night he and his wives would kind of gather around the kitchen table and have these discussions that were deemed so important that they wrote them down in this family journal in Arabic, in handwriting, sort of recording bin Laden's big ideas, talking about this speech that he was going to deliver, a speech that they labored over for weeks, but they also said to each other, we need to get this out because, bin Laden we need to kind of get him in front of the people because he's going to deliver this really super important speech. And somehow he'll take control of the Arab Spring. Of course, this was a total delusion. No one really cared about bin Laden's views on the Arab Spring. And his big idea was to get a group of religious scholars together to advise a new government. Now, as you can imagine, those religious scholars would be kind of Taliban-style religious scholars. And this was not, something that people were begging for in the streets of Cairo or in Libya or elsewhere. But that was one of the things that was really preoccupying him in his final weeks.
Well, you paint this fascinating portrait. He's almost like an aging politician, a narcissist who doesn't feel relevant anymore and is trying to make himself relevant again. I found that part of it fascinating. I also wonder if you'd help us understand a little bit how he viewed women, because you write about these wives who were so integral to crafting his messaging and even his strategy. They're PhDs. Some had expertise, I think, in Quran. And yet, when a woman newscaster would come on the TV, you'd say he would cover it up so he wouldn't see the woman's face.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, this like degraded image of women, and on the other, exalted. How would you reconcile that?
I'm not a psychologist, and it's a very interesting question. I mean, he was very close to his mother. I mean, he really worshipped the ground on which she walked. He literally would kiss her feet and kiss her hands. And even when he was sort of fighting the jihad in Afghanistan, he'd call her and ask her what she was cooking. And so he had a very close relationship with his mother. So, that might explain, he doesn't, and if you're a kind of observant Muslim woman, he would treat you pretty well. It didn't extend to, but yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a paradox, certainly. And when you write a book, you don't sometimes see the paradoxes yourself. And you just pointed one out, which is, when the satellite TV, he watched a lot of TV, and when women broadcaster would come on like yourself, he would take the remote and kind of click the channel guide to kind of cover her face. So that, it's kind of, odd behavior at the same time that he's being quite respectful to these two older wives and really soliciting their opinion. And his oldest wife, Hamza, the mother of Hamza, she had been, when after 9/11, she fled to Iran. She lived there under house arrest for about a decade. And I think of all the wives, he was closest to her, certainly the one he respected the most. And she suddenly reappeared in his life on February 15th, 2011. Al-Qaeda kidnapped an Iranian diplomat in Pakistan. There was a prisoner swap, and his family members who were living in Iran under house arrest started coming out. And he wrote her these letters saying, I'm so excited to see you, and, like almost these love letters. He even said to her, look, because she went from Iran to Waziristan. Waziristan is on the Pakistan-Afghan border, very remote region. And he said at one point, I'll come and pick you up, which would have been an extraordinary risk to travel 300 miles from his hideout. And he's one of the most recognizable people in the world. And he was, so excited about seeing her, he was going to go volunteering to go and pick her up. In the end, he didn't do that. She came under her own steam. But, I think he loved this. He seemed to have loved his wives. At the same time that he, had this, kind of Taliban style view. One of the discoveries in the book is that in the bin Laden household, women, once females hit the age of 3, they began this rigorous segregation from men, which, I mean, people don't do that. I mean, usually it's when girls hit puberty that they can't, if in a very fundamentalist household, there'd be a more rigorous segregation. So bin Laden was imposing this super Taliban style kind of segregation of the sexes on his family at the same time that he kind of respected his two oldest wives. And it was quite a scene at the compound where they all lived, because there was the 28-year-old wife, the 54-year-old wife, and the 62-year-old wife, a dozen kids and grandkids, all living on this compound with bin Laden. And
so
people ask me, how did the Pakistanis not know that bin Laden was in Abbottabad? And one of my answers is Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger was found not far from where you're sitting. I can't remember which small town in California, but he disappeared for 20 years, and he was the subject of a very intense FBI manhunt, and he disappeared in the United States. And so, people, if you're being careful, and bin Laden was certainly being careful, he disappeared. But most fugitives don't take this huge kind of entourage with them. And when the CIA people who really knew bin Laden saw there was a mysterious extra family living on this compound, the fact that there were a lot of wives and kids, the people who really knew him, many of whom were women analysts, said, that could well be bin Laden.
I want to put a point on this because it was one of the surprises when I started reading this. To me, it was conventional wisdom at the time bin Laden was killed, and I was a political reporter in Washington. It was just conventional wisdom that he was killed in Pakistan. Obviously, Pakistan knew he was there and was helping him hide, and they were just playing a game on the U.S. And you emphatically assert that is not the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to prove negatives, as you know, but, we got there were 470,000 files released in full by the Trump administration, and a lot of them were not useful because bin Laden would write 50 versions of the same memo. His kids would watch cartoons. They released everything. But the 6,000 pages of useful material, and there are bin Laden's letters to his family, bin Laden's memos to al-Qaeda, people affiliated with al-Qaeda, the Pakistani Taliban, Mullah Omar, a bunch of letters to sort of the whole jihadist movement. And there's nothing in there from bin Laden to a Pakistani official. There's no indication the Pakistanis knew where he was. And in fact, bin Laden was hiding from people on the compound. So one of the bodyguards' wives, there were two bodyguards, didn't know it was Osama bin Laden hiding on the compound. So, and why would he clue the Pakistanis in? I mean, he wasn't cluing anybody. People in al-Qaeda didn't know where he was, or they would get, these memos from him, but they didn't know where they originated from. So, he had no reason to tell the Pakistanis. And the reason that people have this view is, he was living about a mile from Pakistan's version of West Point. And people sort of say, well, they must have known, but they didn't know. And in fact, you may recall that al-Qaeda tried to kill General Musharraf, the leader of Pakistan, in 2000 twice. And early in the years after 9/11, Pakistan was quite helpful about al-Qaeda, and they turned over Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the operational commander of 9/11. They arrested the number 3 leader of al-Qaeda in 2005, turned him over to the United States. So there was actually quite a lot of tension with the Pakistanis and al-Qaeda. But bringing it up to today, it is fascinating that on yesterday, as we're talking, Siraj Haqqani was appointed Minister of the Interior. Now that's in Afghanistan. And Siraj Haqqani is like a made man in al-Qaeda. So it's the first time in history that a member of al-Qaeda is now a cabinet member. And the Ministry of the Interior in Afghanistan it's like DHS and FBI combined. So, and the Haqqanis had a long history with al-Qaeda. So it's not that the Pakistanis knew where he was. It's certainly that this Haqqani network, which has links to Pakistan's military intelligence agency, certainly had these ties to al-Qaeda. So it's sort of 6 degrees of separation, but it doesn't mean that the Pakistanis knew where he was.
I really want to ask you to tease out for us the relationships between al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and then what is the Haqqani network? How is that distinct from the other two?
Well, the UN releases a report, a quarterly report, which answers this question in some detail. And in June, they said al-Qaeda and the Taliban remain closely aligned. I'm quoting from the report. They also said that Siraj Haqqani, who I just mentioned, is on the leadership council of al-Qaeda, and the Haqqani network is a component of the Taliban. The Haqqani network just won the war for the Taliban, really, because Haqqani is the military leader of the Taliban. So he was the deputy leader of the Taliban. Now he's the Minister of the Interior. By the way, they're all acting ministers in a kind of Trumpian touch. I'm not quite sure, because I think they're going to be acting for a long time. But
is there a body to even officially confirm them? I mean, what?
Well, they announced these people will be in charge and
interim.
Interim, yeah. But it's an odd world that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and the Taliban, just before 9/11, assassinated Ahmad Shah Massoud, the leader of the anti-Taliban resistance. Bin Laden authorized that assassination, and that was kind of the curtain raiser for 9/11. Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud, is now leading the anti-Taliban resistance. His forces have been more or less completely defeated. So it's like history is, tomorrow is actually the 20th anniversary of Ahmad Shah Massoud's assassination.
So can I pause you there? Yeah. You think Massoud, would you explain to us a little bit more who was the Massoud father? Who is this Massoud? And do you think, I understand that some of them have fled into the mountains. Do you think there's a chance for some survival there, or they'll be fully defeated? I
mean, Afghanistan is a great place to disappear. So, they can, the Panjshir Valley, which is very remote and mountainous, they can disappear, or they could go over the border into Tajikistan. So some of them are going to survive, but the Taliban is much better armed now than it was before 9/11, because it's got all these American armored vehicles. Through those pictures we've seen in Kandahar with the Taliban coming out on armored vehicles and mine-resistant vehicles and armored Humvees, and it was very reminiscent of ISIS in the summer of 2014. So they're much better armed. They've been fighting for 20 years. They've won the war totally, which they were in the process of winning the war totally until 9/11 happened. And then, the United States intervened and they toppled them in 3 months. But they were, just before 9/11, they were about to win the war. So we're sort of back to where we were before. The difference is the Taliban is much better armed, but on our side, we're much better defended. I mean, on 9/11, there were 16 people on the no-fly list. The last time that there was a publicly available figure, Senator Dianne Feinstein said there were 81,000 people on the no-fly list in 2016. And there's like 1.5 million people on the tied list, which means that if you get on an American flight or a US passenger plane, you go into secondary screening. And there wasn't TSA, there wasn't Department of Homeland Security, there wasn't National Counterterrorism Center. There's a whole bunch of new organizations that make us safer. So we are much better defended, but that doesn't prevent Al Qaeda, the Taliban, others sort of inspiring homegrown attacks. I mean, if you think about the San Bernardino attack, it was the people who carried that out were one was an American citizen and the other one was an American legal resident. And they killed 14 people inspired by ISIS. They never went to Iraq or Syria. So my concern is, you could have people training in Afghanistan, but it's very hard to get them all the way to the United States. It's easier for them to do an attack against an American target in the region or in Europe. But certainly this is going to be an inspirational event, and you're going to see the Al Qaeda, other jihadi groups, I think, potentially using Afghanistan as a sort of propaganda tool to inspire homegrown attacks in the United States. That I think is a completely legitimate concern.
That's interesting. So we've hardened our defenses enough that it's enough of a deterrent effect that we're less likely to inspire a large-scale attack like we saw on 9/11.
Yeah.
But would you tease out a little further, what was the symbolic meaning and the propaganda opportunity in the U.S. exit from Afghanistan? How will that be used by Al Qaeda and other groups?
I think there's three great victories for them. It's one, pushing the Soviets out of Afghanistan; two, 9/11; and three, pushing the United States out of Afghanistan. The second time the jihadi movement had to push the superpower out of Afghanistan. So it's a huge propaganda victory. And I'm sure on 9/11 is going to be irresistible for the Taliban to be celebrating, and Al Qaeda and all these groups. And the split screen will be the names of the dead, being memorialized at the Trade Center, the Pentagon in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And at the same time, these groups, celebrating their great victory. I mean, they're not. I mean, why wouldn't they celebrate it? I think President Biden made an unforced error here. He didn't. No, I don't think there was a huge constituency saying, "Let's get out." There was the withdrawing from Afghanistan was broadly popular. The execution is broadly not popular. But people's views can change based on the facts. So if the Taliban engage in ethnic cleansing, start killing Westerners, if Al Qaeda or other groups carry out some kind of terrorist attack against an American target, that can change people's views. And usually, I mean, you covered this a lot. Usually when a president makes this kind of decision, he or she doesn't do it right at the beginning of their term, because it could blow up on their watch. And it's already blown up on Biden's watch. Look at his numbers. Between the COVID and the Taliban, he's drifting down his favorability rating. So I think this is a mistake of his own making that wasn't really that necessary.
So there's two parts to that. One is the politics of it, and I think it's yet to be determined whether this actually factors into how people vote. We don't know. But then there's also the security question. And I'm curious, given everything you've said, do you think we are less safe now because we're out of Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think so, because this is not, I'm not saying there's going to be a terrorist attack in the United States emanating from Afghanistan anytime soon. But you have to be concerned about, this is a great jihadist victory. They'll try and inspire people in the United States. They don't have to get people in the United States. They're here already who have these ideas. And, we saw that with ISIS. Think about the Orlando attack. It was the most lethal terrorist attack since 9/11. It was carried out by somebody born in the United States. Omar Mateen was born in Queens, New York, just like Donald Trump. And, carried out the attack in Orlando, killed 49 people. And so he was very American. This is why the travel ban made no sense at all, because it was a kind of solution to a problem that didn't really exist. The problem was people radicalizing in the United States because what they saw was going on in Iraq and Syria, and ISIS sort of inspiring them. And I think some of the same things will come out of Afghanistan. That is super plausible. Less plausible, less likely is somebody getting trained in Afghanistan and trying to carry out an attack in the United States. I think that's hard to do. More plausible is getting trained in Afghanistan and carry out an attack against an American target in Pakistan, or pick your pick your relatively easy to get to from Afghanistan country, and that seems plausible too. So I mean, we're still very well defended by all the things that we've already discussed, and that's not going away. But we're not particularly well defended, against people with any kind of extremist ideology who are here in the United States, whether they're white supremacists or jihadists.
When we talk about factors that feed anti-Western sentiment, I think about unintended consequences and the drone warfare that we have leaned into since 9/11. I first of all, can you explain a little bit for people who don't know, what is the impact of U.S. drones flying over an environment like Afghanistan on the population and on perceptions of the West?
Well, the drone program, like for instance in Pakistan, that's a CIA drone program. It's never been really officially acknowledged. I mean, President Obama talked about it in general terms. That was very unpopular in Pakistan, not initially because of civilian casualties and the sort of when the program first started, and then as time went on, like because of the infringement of national sovereignty. So do the thought experiment where there's a bunch of, kind of terrible cartel people living in Brentwood. And, a neighboring state takes them out with drones. I mean, on one level, it's great. The cartel is destroyed, but the people of Brentwood would be pretty annoyed. Because even if there were no civilian casualties, they just wouldn't want it. So I think that's what happened in Pakistan, where there was but it was President Obama who was the real drone president. There were 122 drone strikes in Pakistan in 2010. They were in the tribal areas, so that's a very specific area on the Afghan border. But nonetheless, it was very unpopular. Now that program has more or less completely disappeared. Trump actually took for the last maybe 2 years had no drone strikes in Pakistan, and President Biden's really pretty much suspended the program. So.
But he says we're going to rely a lot on over-the-horizon capabilities going
forward.
Well,
that's a very good point.
I assume that means in part drone warfare.
Yeah, it's drones. I mean, that's what took out these ISIS-K targets in Afghanistan just now. So yes, he, at the same time that he sort of wants to suspend it. Now, in Afghanistan, it's a little more complicated because, some of these places where the drone program has happened, we're not officially in a state of hostility. So we're not at war with Pakistan, yet the drone program has continued. So, I think, but just broadening it out a little bit, between, presidents as different as Trump, Obama, and Biden, and even George W. Bush, all kind of came to the same place, which is to really deal with this threat, we're going to use drones, cyber warfare, special forces, and special operation forces. Special operation forces is Delta and Navy SEALs. Special forces is the Green Berets. They advise and assist local forces. And so that, because Americans don't want to send a big army anywhere unless there was a really compelling reason. And this is a politically sustainable approach, have a relatively small number of boots on the ground. And we still have 2,500 troops in Iraq right now. We just renamed them non-combat troops, which made it more politically palatable for the Shia political parties there. So Biden could have taken a different approach in Afghanistan. One of the things he's consistently said is I was bound by the Trump agreement. Well, that's nonsense, because the Taliban wasn't bound by the agreement. They didn't observe any of the deal. And at the same time, Biden very quickly got back in the Paris Climate Agreement. He got back in the World Health Organization. So he wasn't bound by this agreement. This is a convenient fig leaf for him.
There is that argument. I'm curious what you think. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
where he argues that he couldn't have breached the agreement without increasing troops, because that would have invited more Taliban attacks. And so the choice was increase troops or exit. Do you accept that framework?
I do on one level, but I think he's presented it like I think he used the phrase he would have had to send in tens of thousands more troops. And that right. I think is it. So he has presented as get out entirely, or it's nation building and the invasion of Normandy. I'm kind of exaggerating, but Obama basically had the same discussion internally in 2015 and 2016, and he really wanted to go to zero in Afghanistan. In the end, he concluded he left 8,400 troops, which is
But Biden thought Obama got rolled basically by the military, right? And he wasn't going to have that same thing happen to him.
But that is in a different time frame. So Biden thought Obama got rolled during the surge, which is in 2009, 2010. Right. And I think Obama felt that he got rolled as well, by the way. So, but by the end of the Obama second term, Obama wanted to go to zero. He said, there's too much risk involved. I could leave 8,400 troops. It's not like that's politically sustainable at home. There are not going. It's not going to have a huge number of. There's not going to be a large number of deaths. It's not that expensive. So Biden could have taken it different, but he very strongly, obviously believes. You saw his speech after the final pullout. I mean, he was like, he answered all his critics in a very angry fashion, and it's just something he feels very strongly about. But go ahead.
You know these people more than almost anyone. Who in the West? Who should we know about in the Taliban leadership? Who are the key personalities and names we should become familiar with?
Well, that's an interest. I mean, this is a very opaque bunch of people. They're not like there's a spokesman, Najib. His name is I'm spacing on his name. There's a Taliban spokesman who is kind of the face of it. There is Siraj Haqqani, the Minister of the Interior. There's the kind of supreme leader, who's the Mullah Akhundzada. But I mean, it's the biographies of these people are mostly Siraj Haqqani. Almost really nothing's really known about him, or very little. I mean, it's not like, and they haven't sought publicity or. Siraj Haqqani, as far as I'm aware, has never spoken to the media. The Taliban leader, I don't think, has ever spoken to the media. When Mullah Omar ran the Taliban, he almost never gave an interview. He never met with foreigners. His knowledge of the outside world was super limited. So I think, there's also Mullah Baradar, who is the political face of the Taliban. He's the sort of Doha negotiator.
Is he more westernized?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he spent 8 years in a Pakistani prison.
So no.
And we got him out. We, the United States, got him out in order so he could do this negotiation. And Mullah Baradar, more is known about him. He's interacted more with Western officials. But I think the bottom line is like, this is not. We don't know very much about the leadership. I think that they are pretty similar to the old leadership in their views of the world. And we will see.
When you said we got them out with the help of the Qataris. And Qatar has been sort of at the center of these negotiations, both the peace agreement with the Taliban and in the last few weeks, as Americans have tried to help evacuate people, the Qataris have been the key go-betweens who have these great relationships with the Taliban leadership. Do you have a theory, or can you explain why the Qataris are so invested in us leaving and in building this relationship with the Taliban? Do they have something to gain?
I think the Qataris, look, I mean, they want to, it's a tiny place. So I've spent a fair amount of time in Doha. It's probably like, it's the size of downtown Washington. I mean, it's a small city state with, per capita, one of the richest places in the world. They have a ton of money. They're sitting on the world's largest natural gas reserves. They set up Al Jazeera, which obviously was sort of an Arabic version of CNN, and really an independent media organization. I think the Qataris, because of they want to punch above their weight, and I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they often will kind of be the negotiator to, like, in Libya or in with the Palestinians. They're kind of trying to maintain relationships with all these different groups and sort of be a player. I think that when it comes to Afghanistan, they must have been a good. They facilitated these peace negotiations, which I think were a sham. But that wasn't their fault. That was the United States just sort of basically being taken by the Taliban to the cleaners. Basically, Trump always talked about the worst deal in history. Well, this was really the worst deal in history. The Taliban got everything.
And it was the Trump administration that got this guy out of jail. It was not the Biden administration.
Yeah, and peace negotiations began under Trump in 2018, and then Biden sort of said he was bound by the agreement. So I think the Qataris, are seen as honest brokers by all sides, which is kind of helpful. I mean, just like during the Cold War, people would meet in Vienna. Well,
right, they're the Switzerland of the Middle East right now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to bin Laden. I know I could talk to you all day, but I want to get back to the book. I was talking to some of the people on my team who are younger, and I told them I was speaking to you, and they said, well, when they were taught about 9/11, they were told in school that the reason Osama bin Laden attacked was to undermine Western values and democracy. But that really, in your recounting, wasn't the purpose. The purpose was really, well, would you explain what was his mission? And 20 years later, after the U.S. has exited Afghanistan, is it paying dividends for Al Qaeda?
Well, he had no idea. He couldn't. I mean, A, he's dead, so B, he couldn't see 20 years into the future. I mean, we interviewed him in '97 just for CNN, and he was strangely silent on a number of issues that some people projected on him. He didn't talk about Western values or democracy or any cultural, social issue in the West. He talked about American foreign policy in the Middle East. That was what he was focused on. And the main issue is U.S. support for Saudi Arabia, and to a lesser degree, U.S. support for Israel, support for Egypt. Those were the issues. And his theory of the case on 9/11 was to push us out of the Middle East. He thought that if he applied military pressure on us, that we would pull out of the Middle East, which was a crazy strategy, and it backfired completely. And we're more involved. Qatar is a really good example. The largest U.S. military base in the Middle East is in just outside Doha, and is now housing tens of thousands of Afghan refugees. So that's just one example. We have bases in the United Arab Emirates. We have bases in Djibouti. We have bases in all around the Middle East that we didn't have before 9/11. So he had a strategy. It just didn't make any sense, and it backfired. It's interesting that that's being taught in school, because of course that was the Bush administration line, that they hate us because of our freedoms. And at one point, in fact, bin Laden actually responded to that directly. I didn't put it in this book, but he said something like, if I really hated people's freedoms, why didn't I attack Sweden?
Why is freedom is Sweden the bastion of freedom?
Well, and I think the reason he selected Sweden is his family went on a vacation. All his siblings, like 23 of them, went on a family vacation where they had a rather memorable visit to Sweden, and he may well have been on that trip. So he would have understood that Sweden was like a pretty open society and pretty democratic and very westernized and very, but that was not why he attacked us. That not, he could care less about kind of these cultural issues.
Can you just give us a moment on, do you think that we have built up our counterterrorism defenses so significantly post 9/11 that we're in a better position today?
Yeah, I mean, there's just no doubt. I mean, there was only one attack in the United States with any links to a foreign terrorist organization. That was the one in Pensacola, Florida, in December 2019, when a Saudi military officer killed 3 American sailors. And he had some connections with Al Qaeda in Yemen. Not clear if they directed it or they were just sort of aware of the attack. But that's the exception that proves the rule. So we're in a much better, we're much better defended.
And finally, Peter, we're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11. What does it mean to you? What do you think it means symbolically that the Taliban will once again be ruling Afghanistan? We could even see a Taliban flag over the former U.S. embassy there on the 20th anniversary of the attack.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a grim reality. When on 9/11 20 years ago, I was going to CNN to report on Shah Massoud's assassination by the Taliban. And that was a prelude for them taking over the whole country. And here we are back again, where they have taken over the whole country. And it's just like, I don't think it needed to be this way. And my wife and I met in Afghanistan. We have a lot of Afghan friends. She is from Louisiana, not Afghanistan, but we met there. And, it's very sad. I mean, a lot of my Afghan friends have left years ago because they sort of saw the writing on the wall to some degree, I think, because we've been saying we're leaving for a long time. President Obama started talking about withdrawing in 2009. So the people who are left in a pretty grim situation. I know that, it was, economically people are doing very poorly. And so, yeah, it's sad. I don't think the Taliban will be there forever, because I think they're going to make some mistakes. They're going to engage in ethnic cleansing. They're going to maybe kill some Westerners. A terrorist attack will be fomented from their soil. Something will change. It may take a year, 2 years, 3 years, but our present policy may well change because the facts have changed. I don't think the Taliban are sort of, they're pretty much the same group of people who existed before 9/11.
Meaning you think we might have to go back in one form or another?
Yeah, whether it's President Kamala Harris or President Marco Rubio or President Joe Biden, I think that the situation may require it.
We're not done with Afghanistan, with our intervention.
But if you go back to every president since Jimmy Carter has kind of been sucked in some shape or form, other than George H.W. Bush. He's the only one. But Carter had the Soviet invasion, Reagan had the Soviet occupation, Bill Clinton had Al Qaeda blowing up embassies and warships on his watch. Obama, for him, it was a good war. He sent troops in, surged. Trump, was trying to get out all the time and didn't get there, and Biden has. So, in every administration, we've seen sort of this, desire to get rid of it, but then it doesn't. We can't seem to really get rid of it. We closed our embassy, by the way, in 1989 in Afghanistan after the Soviets withdrew. So,
was it closed until we went back in 2001?
Yeah, it was closed till we went back. So it's never really a smart idea to close an American embassy. There may be, security reasons that sort of make it seem desirable, but you end up being blind to what's going on in the country. And that's certainly what happened to us between 1989 and 2001. And we're about to repeat that again, because we won't have the intelligence assets on the ground. We can still listen to people's conversations through the National Security Agency, but we're not going to have the same level of understanding of what's going on.
Well, I'd like to find a way to end this on a happy note, but I just think that it's not possible.
No, I
think the happy note is read this book. It is riveting. I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to keep going, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge.
Well, thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Jessica Yellin. If you like this video, please click subscribe, and you can click the bell to get notifications when we post new content. Thanks for watching.